My name is Milan Rai. I'm the editor of Peace News, and you may or may not have seen that we published a supplement in the last issue, which was based on interviews with the folk who are speaking today. So we're going to hear from the four peace activists at the heart of this case, and then from Raj, who's the solicitor, their solicitor, and then we'll have Q&A. So we're going to start off with a chat with Jo, who I've now lost. Aha, there she is. Okay, so all right. So Jo Frew is an activist and community organizer and outreach coordinator for Rethinking Security. So thank you very much for doing this with us, Jo. And you had kindly agreed to talk a little bit about the day on which this action happened at the DSEI Arms Fair, which was called No Faith in War Day. So could you tell us a little bit about that and about your involvement in it?
Yeah, so I think, well, it was a few years prior that we started organising sort of themed days of action in the week leading up to the Arms Fair, so during the setup of the Arms Fair. So the Stop the Arms Fair network, of which I am a part, and lots of other people here as well. We wanted to try and stop the fair from setting up rather than take action while it was happening, or at least focus lots of energy on trying to make that happen. And the days were themed to sort of draw different groups of people who might have been doing actions there for years, or maybe it might be a way to sort of bring in more people if there was an issue that they could connect with the Arms Fair and something else that they were part of. So there's lots of different themes on like climate change, a Palestine Solidarity Day, a Students' Day, but also this like No Faith in War Day, bringing together people from different faiths to kind of use their faith and their spirituality as a way of expressing their resistance to the Arms Fair and what they hope for instead. So yeah, that's the reason behind the No Faith in War Day.
And could you tell us a little bit about DSEI, the Arms Fair itself?
Yes, it's one of, I think it used to be the largest, but now it's not the largest, but one of the largest arms fairs in the world, which happens every 2 years at the Excel Centre in London and like over near Canning Town. It's, I don't know how many people go to it, but like thousands and thousands. And it sells weapons, defence equipment, surveillance equipment, everything that armies, navies, air forces could possibly want, and police as well. And although most of it technically is legal, when journalists have been able to get in, human rights activists, they've been able to find equipment that isn't legal, or at least references to it in catalogues. And our government gives a lot of support to making deals happen for like British arms companies, facilitating networking and that sort of thing, often with representatives of governments or militaries from not particularly nice countries. So every time it happens in the build up and sort of when it's happening as well, there's resistance to it.
So coming back to No Faith in War Day, could you tell us a little bit about what kinds of groups were involved in 2017?
Ooh. Having been interviewed for this, for Peace News, I realised how terrible my memory is. Yeah, I think in 2017, there was some, like quite a few Christian groups, Catholic groups especially, who've been taking action for a long time. Quaker groups, there was a Jewish group and a Buddhist group, as far as I remember, but because we were there, even though I was involved in the organising, you know, it's been really great to kind of connect with people from different faith backgrounds, but having then been part of an action that was sort of first thing in the morning, I'm not actually sure what happened afterwards, because I ended up in a police cell. So I'm not entirely sure who was all there.
So coming back to those boxes that we saw pictures of at the beginning of the meeting, God's love knows no borders, stop the arms fair. Could you say a little bit about what those slogans mean to you and why it was important to have those slogans?
Well, stop the arms fair, I suppose, is obvious. We're there to resist the arms fair. And the idea of actually stopping it was important, particularly in that setup week. Not just kind of campaigning during it to say that we don't like it, but actually trying to stop it. And the other one, a number of us are involved supporting asylum seekers and refugees and other migrants here. And that idea of like all of humanity being God's children, being like one, rather than separated by artificial borders, is really important. And I think one of the things that the arms fair does is sell equipment that is used in to maintain national borders and keep people out and perpetuate a lot of injustice and disregard for people's humanity, and to try and like oppose that in our actions, as well as like highlighting that issue was important. And
I don't know whether you can say a little bit about how important God's love is to your involvement in this action, if you want to say something about that. God's love knows no borders.
Well, I think God is love. You know, I don't claim any theological knowledge about who and what God is, but I think a universal love, a universal humanity is where we find God. And if we can't connect with other people, just as humans, as beautiful humans, and with our own our own world that we live in, you know, if there's no love, what's the point? And I feel like the arms fair is it's the opposite of that. It's about separation. It's about maintaining barriers. Well, that is separation, but like the sort of circular narrative around needing these weapons, needing this defense equipment to keep people out because there's something wrong with those people, or they're going to do something bad to our society. So just like a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that's about, I wouldn't even say hate. I mean, there is some of that there, I imagine, but just a sort of disjointed view of who we really are.
Thank you very much, Jo. Thanks for starting off our meeting. And we're now going to go to Chris. I found you, Chris. Okay. And Chris Cole is an anti-war campaigner and researcher. And we're going to hand over to you, Chris, now.
Thanks very much, Mill. Hope everybody can hear me fairly clearly. I thought I'd like to take the opportunity to share some thoughts about something I've been thinking about, which is the kind of tension that can arise really in my experience between the focus of the action and then the kind of opportunities or choices or consequences really that arise because of the legal process. Tension is probably not the right word, but what I'm trying to say is that we kind of engage in this kind of direct action because we're passionately focused on an issue of injustice. And then the legal process can sometimes take us in a different direction, and we end up spending time and energy on something different. In our case, you know, our focus, as Jo said, was on the impact of the arms trade and DSEI. And that changed over the whole 4-year process, really, to the right to protest, or the right to protest. So there is some tension there, I think. And I just kind of wonder, should we be better at keeping our focus, keeping our eyes on the prize, if you like? Or is it right that we engage in this wider work to defend and expand protest rights in this case? So, you know, in this action, indeed, the trial, we were absolutely focused on the issue of DSEI and the fact that the institution of the arms trade, exemplified by DSEI, really causes such misery and destruction for many and financial profit for a very few, and that needs to end. And kind of in particular, because of the work or the lives really of my fellow defendants, we had a kind of focus on how the arms trade fuels war and armed conflict and means people have to flee their homes and families. And yet, of course, we refuse them asylum and refuge here in the UK. So we wanted to physically disrupt what was happening, you know, to directly intervene by blocking the road, but also by that disruption kind of offer an opportunity for others to respond to injustice, you know, passers-by, the police, the media, you know, whoever engaged with our action. You know, that was our focus. And in my head anyway, I thought while there was a chance of a court case, I think we also thought it was equally unlikely. I've certainly been arrested at DSEI before and there've been no charges, or charges have been dropped. Well, equally, you know, protests at DSEI have led to court cases, and I was in prison for non-payment of a fine before. So it wasn't exactly hang the consequences, but the focus was very much on making the action as good as it could be. And then when we ended up in court, in taking the opportunity to explain and communicate as best we could why it was right to do what we did. But, you know, this was all very much focused on DSEI. And then consequently, of course, out of that, the focus changed to the right to protest. And we didn't, of course, none of us went into this action thinking that we were going to be involved in a 4-year process fighting to defend the right to protest. And thankfully, the vast majority of that work, 99.999% of it, was undertaken by the legal team. And I, for one, very much think it was a good thing to do, not least because protest rights are seriously curtailed at the moment by the government. But there was a moment we had to make a choice. Raj said to us, do we want to go down this route? And we chose to. And again, it wasn't that onerous because the legal team picked up the vast majority of the work. But we could have said, I guess, you know, no, we don't want to get involved in that. You know, our focus is, you know, the arms trade or refugee support work, and this is all a distraction. For me, you know, this hasn't been an isolated incident. It's kind of come up in the past when we get involved in MVDA, where there have been, you know, difficulties, opportunities, however you want to call them, twice with injunctions. Firstly, Mill and I were injuncted by BAE Systems, or British Aerospace as they were back then, in 1994. And then about a dozen other people received injunctions after that. And then in 2015, I was part of a demonstration at UAV Engines in Shenstone, where I went to the demonstration, but because I had lots of other work on, I specifically was trying to avoid arrest, but unbeknownst to us, the company had gained a temporary injunction over the weekend, and about 40 of us were arrested when we refused to leave the area. So the choice in that case, I guess, was to spend time challenging the injunctions, or just to ignore them and carry on with our focus, the arms trade or drones or whatever it was. But in both of those occasions, we decided it was right to kind of, you know, to widen out the focus and to challenge the injunctions. And in the Shenstone case, we won. We fought the injunction in a civil court. With a lot of work, actually, we got the judge to overturn the original injunction. He stated that it should never have been granted in the first place. And subsequently, the CPS then dropped all the cases against all those who'd been arrested. And in the BAE case, of course, we fought, but lost. The injunction was upheld. And yeah, that led to me spending some time in prison as well. But I do also think it was a win. The issue very much got the attention. And then, if I remember rightly, no one was injuncted after the original 12 or 14 or so. And then the other example I think I'd like to mention is when Martin Newell and I received an antisocial behaviour order, ASBOs as they were called then. I think they've evolved into something else now, after a kind of 6-person protest at Downing Street to mark the 10th anniversary of the Afghan war in 2011. The ASBO was not to enter the city of Westminster at all. But then, of course, when we challenged it, it was then reduced to the Whitehall, not to go into Whitehall. And then we continued to challenge it until it was eventually dropped. And there have been several attempts, as people may know, to use ASBOs against peace protesters. But thankfully, most of those cases, they've been resisted. But again, I understand these things are re-emerging as these things seem to do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that direct action and, you know, the focus on a particular piece of injunction, it's never quite clear what, if anything, will grow from that. And while it's important to keep focus on the aim of the action, it's also important at times to make connections not only with other issues, but also to be part of a wider struggle for civil and democratic rights, even though that can mean time and energy not spent on the issue that you're passionately committed to.
Thank you very much, Chris. And we're now going to go to Henrietta. Okay. And Henrietta is a writer and teacher in London. And finally, someone's going to talk about the actual action. So that's all to do with my ordering of things. So over to you, Henrietta. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for having me. Hi, Susan. Hi, Chris. I'm just going to talk a bit about the actual action and what led me there, and a tiny bit of reflection afterwards. So first of all, a lot of preparation, I'd say, went into the action, and it being over the summer, I wasn't always there. So friends made the boxes, you saw the boxes, and the tubes that went inside the boxes. The tubes were really elaborately made with chicken wire and tarmac and bolts to attach ourselves to, and I think it was a drain pipe, and hidden inside the painted boxes. And the night before, we gathered at the Catholic Worker House, Giuseppe Conlon House in Haringey, to sort of practice what we were going to do, practice throwing ourselves on the ground, I guess, and who was going to be partnered up with who. So I was to be with Nora with one box, and Chris and Joe with the other box, and to sort of visualize what it would be like. The road to the back of the Excel Centre has 2 parts. It has a sort of a long skinny traffic island in between it. So the idea was to block at least half of that road, again, you know, block the incoming traffic. And so on the morning, we got up very early, as most actions take place early in the morning. And a friend drove us in a hired car. So we had to protect the car with bits of newspaper because the boxes were still a little bit tacky. And we set off, and then of course we were a bit early. So I remember we stopped at the foot of the Balfron Tower, which is a very famous 70s block of flats near the motorway, which is just, I don't know, it's very clear in my mind, this tower, being very, very excited, sitting there at the bottom and hearing reports of people doing slow walking in front of the traffic. So we weren't, you know, we weren't sure when quite how to time it. Anyway, so then eventually we were there and we tumbled out of the car onto the section of road and quickly attached ourselves to the lock-on boxes. I realized suddenly at that point, a bit late, that I'd never done this before. I've always kind of avoided lock-ons because it just seems a bit, I don't like the idea of being stuck. Any action I've done before has always involved sort of moving around. And almost immediately, we were arrested immediately, all within a few minutes of each other. But it took us a while to be cut out. So I remember just lying there on the ground, which has become quite an important thing for me. I mean, the sort of connection with the earth, like just lying there, you kind of come a part of being human, and physical connection with other people that Joe was talking about. Loads of people asked me how I was endlessly, but I just wanted to zone out. And then we just spent the rest of the day in a police cell. Yeah, missed all the activities, and I think I got home in time for tea anyway. It wasn't, yeah. So how I got there, well, I've been introduced to direct action by my husband's family. I was taken on a peace walk when we were only just married, or before we were married, to RAF Molesworth. So direct action wasn't unfamiliar to me. And then when I joined up with the Catholic worker making meals on Sunday afternoons, I heard about Martin Newell being arrested or being in prison, and or I heard about other actions, and I thought, this is something I could really do to contribute. I'd really like to join in with this. And I really wanted to be a peace activist. And so in particular, because I had a teaching job, I never go to DSEI because that week of the year is the most busy week if you teach in a further education college. So I was just, a few years before, I was just so delighted to have this day off so I could do the action. I tried, I think, yeah, it was my ambition to be a peace activist. So I tried out all the different things you could possibly do. So I learned about vigils, leafleting, other actions, going to other actions. And then I was also lucky enough to go to Afghanistan and Pakistan, where I could sort of appreciate physically and hear firsthand accounts of how hard war makes life, particularly for young people and for women. And I think this, this in particular has sort of motivated me and made a connection. And also trips to Calais. Also learning about drones particularly as well with Chris made me realize how the arms trade, you know, sells the latest gadget, and then the country thinks, oh, they can sell this to their own population, that, you know, this is a humane war, these kind of terrible myths that are told about arms. And I just wanted to reflect briefly, like, the action was 5 years ago now. Sorry. And I really feel there's a sort of time and a season for direct action. People say that the people who take part in the direct action benefit the most, maybe, from the action. And I'd say that was definitely true in my case. I sort of, that action, from that action and other ones, it did really widen and deepen my interest in the arms trade. There's something about the physical act of taking this stand that made me want to learn more. And I even made a game based on a book about the arms trade and reading and writing. And I attended a citizens committee in the Houses of Parliament, and it made me realise that people from all walks of life are against the arms trade, not just the people who turn up outside DSEI. And it's just like a wide-ranging, topic for issue. And even I meet it in Susan will be happy that I mentioned Mill on the Floss here, they'd say in Mill on the Floss, George Eliot says, you know, that war only makes money for arms dealers. But I'd just like to say that this, it was 5 years ago, so I sort of feel as if I'm in a different place now. I want to do different kinds of activism. I do see that the action as a creative act, and in that sense, I'm a bit of an artist maybe, and like the happenings from the 60s, it's not really up to us how it's interpreted, and so the lawyers interpreted it in a particular way, which took it to the Supreme Court. And as Chris said, luckily we had to put a little bit of energy into that, but mostly the lawyers did the work. But that's how I see it, as a sort of public creative act. And the other thing I'd like to say is that it led me to engage a lot more in feminism, became more aware of how war affects women and violence affects women. So I've been going to Women in Black, which is just a different kind of protesting, but we mention violence against women, or wanting more women to be in diplomacy, or violence against women in war, or domestic violence, nearly every week. And that's how I take part at the moment. I think that's me.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. And now we're going to come to Nora Ziegler, anti-militarist activist and grassroots organizer. So I will hand over to you, Nora.
Well, thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. I need to get rid of my selfie, otherwise this is going to drive me nuts. I can't do that. Okay, oh well then. So I wanted to share another side of the whole story, which is that throughout the court process, or especially the beginning, like the first trial that we had, like from when we got arrested, I had a lot of doubts, and I remember it as a really difficult time. I mean, I was sort of very stressed anyway, because I was at the Catholic work. I was very busy in those days. There was just a few of us running a shelter with 25 people there, providing accommodation for homeless migrants and refugees without recourse to public funds. But I just remember, yeah, just having lots of doubts. And I think it had to do a lot with what Chris and Henrietta also mentioned about those tensions, and how an action, when you do a direct action, how it takes on a life of its own, and it has involves so many more people beyond just your little group, and has consequences for so many different people, or consequences that you maybe don't know what the consequences will be. So, you know, for example, while living at the Catholic Worker, doing direct action, you know, can have consequences for the refugees who I live with, all the people who come and support. It was beautiful and overwhelming how many people came to support us in court. But I don't necessarily know, do they agree with my action though? Because I've done so much court support for other people where I've thought, like with a lot of my friends who did XR actions, for example, where I thought, I don't agree with your action at all, but I'm obviously going to support you when you're being repressed by the state. And I think there's a lot of that. So I was wondering, you know, how am I accountable to the people who are coming to support me, who are putting their time and energy to support me through this process? Also, you know, in the court, we were speaking, and we were sort of claiming to represent, to have acted on behalf of refugees, of people in Palestine, in Syria, Yemen. But what gives me the right to speak on behalf of those people? How do they hold me accountable and make sure that I'm not misrepresenting them? And then later on, you know, when this Ziegler verdict came about, thinking, oh, I hope this doesn't somehow end up having negative consequences by increasing, you know, for example, leading up to the new policing bill. And all of this is not to say that I think our action was bad. It's just to say that there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of unknown consequences, and I felt like there wasn't, like, I didn't feel accountable. Like, I didn't feel like I was accountable to the wider activist community, and I would have liked, yeah, that was just something that I really felt really strongly in that time, where I felt like in peace activism, you know, who gets to decide where our resources and our collective energies go, what kind of strategies, what kind of actions we do? It ends up being activists who have the kind of social power and privilege to do high risk, like sort of more militant, arrestable actions, and paid organizers, people who already have a lot of power. And we need those people. But at the same time, I really strongly believe that that kind of power that we hold and that we can use to achieve social change also affects our perspective. So, you know, because as soon as I have that kind of power, for example, being from a middle class family, being white, gives me certain privileges that allow me to be able to take this kind of action. However, it also means I'm invested in those structures, even if I don't want to be. Like, even if I'm really engaged in anti-racist activism, even if I'm really class conscious, I still benefit from certain, like from capitalism in ways that's going to cloud my judgment. And that's something that I think a lot of us need to reflect on and understand. And in the end, the only way to solve that is that we need mutual, like we need to bring lots of different perspectives in and make sure that, yes, we have people who can offer their power and the sort of resources that they have to the movement, but also people who have a really radical perspective and a revolutionary perspective that comes from their own experience of being excluded from capitalism. So yeah, so when I talk about accountability, that's kind of what I mean, like mutual accountability, making sure that it's not just a certain group of people who get to decide and shape what activism looks like, just because they're the ones who have like the resources to do it. Oh yeah, anyway, so yeah, I had a lot of doubts at the time, and then a few years after that, like while this whole court thing was playing out, I had a massive burnout, which had to do with the Catholic work as well, and some other personal things that happened. And then since then, I've been thinking a lot about this stuff, about power relations in grassroots organizing, and I've been writing about it as well. So that's been really good. So I have been sort of trying to think about, you know, what does this mean and how can we organize more accountably, yeah, in a way that strengthens social justice movements. How much time do I have left now? 2 minutes. Yeah, okay, cool. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say, except maybe, I guess, I think one of the reasons why all these doubts came up during the court process as well is that you're meant to, I felt like a big pressure to be in court and to say some really passionate, powerful kind of thing about why I did this action. But if I'd been really honest, I would have also said something like, I don't know, you know, I want to abolish arms trade and war and capitalism, but also I know that this action isn't gonna achieve that. So if I'm really honest, part of me is doing this action because I want to feel better, because I want to distance myself from arms trade and want to make a statement about myself. And that's not a bad thing. That is not a bad thing. Like, you know, wanting to, yeah, you know, that can be sort of a personal transformative thing or whatever. That's not a bad thing. But again, that's not, yeah, I guess that's the reason why I think not just people like me with that motivation should be shaping what kind of actions take place, if that makes sense. I think we just need a bit of humility and honesty about that, and understanding that we need lots of different people at the table, basically, in these movements. Yeah, okay. That's all I have to say for now. I guess we'll do Q&A later.
Thank you very much, Nora. And our last speaker today is Raj Chada, partner at Hodge, Jones and Allen, and the solicitor in the Ziegler case. So Raj represented Nora in the Magistrates Court and was instructing barristers, because more lawyers joined in as the case progressed. So over to you, Raj. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Two sort of initial things. One, actually, before I forget, is that Glynna Ní one of the other lawyers in the case, sends her apologies and would love to have seen all of you and to contribute to the debate, but she couldn't come today. The second is to pay tribute to the 4 people that you've just heard from, because I think, firstly, for doing the action itself, and we always shouldn't underestimate how brave it is for individuals to do these actions for whatever reasons they want to do it, and then sticking with it through 4 or 5 years. It really is a great tribute to them. And I always say that lawyers such as me are just activists who aren't brave enough to actually do the actions and have to live vicariously through the real activists. I do really acknowledge the pressure that Nora and Chris, the tension that Nora and Chris have talked about. And I certainly remember some initial conversations with Nora about what can you say in court, what wouldn't be great to say in court. And certainly during the trial phase, I think there can be a tension between what lawyers want and what activists would like to say. And I suppose our job is to try and frame it in a way that satisfies you and gets the viewpoint out, particularly about DSEI, whilst complying with all the rules that have to be complied with. And that can be an uncomfortable process for clients. But I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of what the action's about, particularly during the trial phase. I think as it progressed to this mammoth that it became in a higher court, high court, and Supreme Court, there's a tension or there's a pressure on defendants because it becomes a bigger deal to the wider protest movement. And some pressure, some time is inevitably, and energy is directed to it. And also really, what I find really strange as a lawyer is there's a lack of agency, because the lawyers do sort of take over a bit. And so you're not involved in it on a day-to-day basis anymore as you are during the trial phase. So I think coping through those 4 or 5 years is a great tribute to the defendants. And it has become a really, really important case on the right to free speech. And I'm going to come back to the tensions in a second, but I'm just going to read out a paragraph, actually, ironically, from the High Court decision, because Lord Singh gave a very erudite and good judgment for about 3/4 of the judgment until he came to the very end and then said, yeah, but they're all guilty. But what he did set out was why free speech was important and how it links to the campaigns. So I'm just going to read out his 4 reasons. So he said it's important for the autonomy of the individual and their self-fulfillment. So that actually the very thing, Nora, that was talking about how it's important to you as an individual to act. Secondly, it's conducive to the discovery of truth in the marketplace of ideas. History teaches us that what may begin as heresy, for example, the idea that the earth revolves around the sun, may end up as accepted fact and indeed the orthodoxy. And I think you've even seen that in DSEI. You've seen the campaign gather more and more momentum over the course of the last decade to make sure that people know what it is. Thirdly, it's essential to the proper functioning of a democratic society. People must have access to ideas and opinions so that they can effectively participate in a democracy on an informed basis. And fourthly, it helps maintain social peace by permitting people a safety valve to let off steam. In this way, it is hoped that peaceful and orderly change will take place in a democratic society, eliminating or reducing the risk of violence and disorder. Look, all of those are fine words, but need to be enacted in practice. And although the High Court conducted a very thorough analysis, then found against the defendants, and it wasn't until we got to the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court said, in essence, was that when people are involved in protests, before you convict them, you have to consider whether a conviction would disproportionately interfere with their right to free speech. And you do that by considering an individual's right to free speech on one side versus the rights of others who may have been disrupted on the other. And you have to come to some sort of balance when you balance rights. And that in the Ziegler defendants case, the district judge had got the balance right, because the district judge had weighed up all the factors and considered that the defendants should be acquitted, and so those acquittals should be reinstated. What's interesting about that analysis is that one of the factors that you weigh up in the balance of the right to free speech is the importance of the view. So a political view is given more weight than what they call mere tittle-tattle. And that's presented us a way in to talk more about the campaign itself during cases. Because what we have to show, we argue now in cases, is the case of Ziegler in the Supreme Court talks about the importance of the right to free speech, talks about one of the balances being the importance of the public issue. So court, we want to tell you how important this issue is. We want the defendants to be able to talk about how important, be it campaigning to end the arms fair, campaigning against the climate crisis, or whatever campaign we're representing. It's an essential part of the balancing exercise. And I think to some extent that has worked. There have been some cases in the XR cases that we've done where that has allowed some more evidence to be presented. It is, though, ultimately difficult because we are in different arenas. There is a legal framework that we have to comply with the legal rules, and there is an activist campaign determination, a right determination to shine a light on whatever that issue may be. And I think there is still that constant battle about how to square that circle. The consequence of the Ziegler judgment, though, has been a real pushback from the senior judiciary now. So there's a real battle going on to maintain the line on this judgment. So already we've had before the High Court and the Court of Appeal that this balancing exercise does not apply to aggravated trespass as an offence, does not apply potentially, it's not entirely clear from the judgment, to the offence of public nuisance, or certainly to the prosecution of public nuisance. There are many individuals in the state who just simply don't like the judgment, be that the police, the government, or the judiciary. And you will see more and more cases come up in the next year or so in which the ambit and limits are tested. And some people who perhaps didn't understand it and didn't understand the balancing. During one of the, I think it was Extinction Rebellion cases, or it might have been Insulate Britain actions, where 500 people were being arrested in one night. I remember calling a police station at about 2 o'clock in the morning in Chelmsford, and I said, "Oh well, what's happening to these defendants? They were arrested in the middle of the the M25. What's happened?" He said, "Oh no, we've let them all go. ain't you heard of the judgment of Ziegler, mate? The copper said to me, we're letting them all go. And I thought that was slightly ironic. But, you know, there was a misunderstanding as well from all parties about what the judgment meant, and it does require this balancing exercise. The next case that it's going to be definitely tested on is the Colston Four referral, where the Attorney General, Colston, the case that many of you will know, was the toppling of the statue of the slave trader in Bristol. There were 4 individuals were charged with criminal damage, and they were acquitted. The Attorney General has referred the acquittals to the Court of Appeal, and that is going to be heard before the Lord Chief Justice, who's the most senior judge in England and Wales. So it shows the importance that the state is attaching to this, on the 29th and the 30th of June. And broadly, what the government are arguing is that the trial judge got it wrong, that proportionality or Ziegler should not apply to a criminal damage allegation, that is sort of somehow inbuilt into the system for criminal damage. And we will clearly argue that that's not the case. We argue it applies across the board, irrespective of what offence a protester has been charged with. And I think that's going to be a really important case to try to stop this retraction of the Supreme Court case in Ziegler until the Supreme Court rules on it again. So we will see. But I suppose I conclude by going back to the tension. And I think I've said this in a case recently. Free speech as a theory is pretty pointless unless it changes things. Because what you really want, as well as the free speech, is the power to be heard and the power to change. And that's why and how we need to try and link those 2 tensions and 2 strands together in any future case and in any future campaign.
Thank you very much, Raj. And I forgot to say that Raj was one of the solicitors in the Colston Four case, and therefore, you know, as he was saying, that he'll be arguing in that appeal there. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We've come to the Q&A section. So if you would like to ask a question, I think we'll just try unmuting to start off with, because I see a very great self-discipline amongst the assembled crowd. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, then please unmute yourself and put your question.
Can I start?
Please do.
Yeah. First of all, just to say thanks very much to the 4 of you. We just said in our little breakout group, we really appreciated the reflection and the honesty and the sharing, and that was really remarkable. I just wanted to ask or say, this tension about the action and then the follow-up legal consequences, if it wasn't for the legal process, would the action just have been forgotten? And is there something about the fact? And then Susan might want to add, she was saying to me in actions that she's been involved in, sometimes the legal process is part of the whole reflection on doing the action. I don't want to speak for you, Susan, you might want to.
I'm sure other folk. Oh, go ahead, Susan. Yep.
Do you want me to? Yeah, just to explain what I was saying, that when I first did nonviolent direct action, it was in the States, and we learned that the action is the preparation, the actual scenario, the court case, and if prison is involved then. And so we looked at that, the whole thing, as the action.
Okay, I'm sure other folk will want to say something, but I think, Chris, do you want to start us off, since you spoke to that most?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, it was lovely to see, I was going to say old faces, but familiar faces is probably the better way to put it. I appreciate what you're saying and understand what you're saying. I suppose I kind of felt that there's a difference for me between the action and the court case, you know, in regard to the action itself, and then it can go in a different way. And I guess for me there is a little difference. A difference there, and I have definitely in the past resented the effort of getting involved in challenging the kind of wider consequences rather than being able to work on the thing that I want to work. But I understand very much, Susan, what you're saying, that it's all part of it and that there are all connections together. With regard to what you were saying, Carol, about whether you know, the court case is part and otherwise everything would be forgotten. Again, I can appreciate that point of view, but for me, there have been plenty of actions that I've been involved in that haven't ended up in court cases, and I've been very happy with that, either because going through the court case, which, you know, the actual court case where you get your day in court is such a minor part of the whole legal thing, you know, the kind of constant going back to court and the, you know, doing without that at times is a delight. But other times, you know, just doing the action itself, just kind of speaking out and feeling empowered. And, you know, I think both Nora and Raj referred to the fact that sometimes we do the action ourselves to feel just a bit empowered. And there are negatives and positives to that, is a good thing. So to sum up, yes and no to both of those things.
Okay. So I'll just look to the other Ziegler Four folk, if anyone wants to say anything to that. Henrietta does. Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to add to that in the you know, the 2 years before and 2 years afterwards, we did actions that involved paint and blocking the road, and they were really fun. And I think quite theatrical, and had their meaning and didn't involve being arrested. And also I don't think we really thought this one would. There are other kind of actions, you know, there's loads of different kinds of actions, and maybe some, yes, it is very important that you get arrested. But this particular one with hundreds of people involved in a very public place didn't seem like it was necessary to be arrested to have any impact. The impact was actually disrupting the arrival of the weapons and military hardware into the arms fair. So, yeah.
Mill, you're muted.
Yes, I said something very important and wise there, which is lost forever. But I'm just looking to Nora and Joe in case they want to say anything.
Not really. I think I would just agree with what Henrietta just said. I think a lot of it depends on the aim of the action, like whether it's important that you get arrested or whether it's important that the action is even remembered. Depends on, you know, what you're hoping to achieve with it, which will be different in different contexts.
And did you want to say something, Nora? Okay, from my position, I'd just like to distinguish maybe between three different scenarios, one of which, how I understood like Susan's description of one model of doing it is, you decide on the message that you're going to give, and that's all you're going to do all the way through is, I'm going to say this message. And then scenario two is an activist does an action and then starts contending with the legal defense stuff. And then it's about selecting and twisting and whatever, trying to fit into a legal framework. And that can be an uncomfortable thing. And scenario three is where things go sideways, where you were doing an anti-arms trade action and then it turns into freedom to protest action. And it's like, okay, which I think was what Chris was talking about. So if you've decided in the beginning, I'm not going to say anything but the message that I decided at the beginning, and that's just going to be it all the way through. That's a very sort of simple, in a way, thing to do. And it's when you haven't figured out what you're going to do legally, and then you start trying to fit yourself into a box, or things kind of develop. So anyway, I just thought it might be useful to distinguish those. Any other questions bubbling up? Okay, I'm going to ask something, which is, I'm going to ask all the 4 Ziegler activists. You're quite reluctant to celebrate. That's how it's felt to me. In a sense, it's like there is this super modest thing going on, or like, you know, what is the fuss about us 4 or our action? That, anyway, something like that. That was a very coherent and prepared version of the question. Does anyone want to say anything to that reluctance?
I can do.
I was going to
Because-
ask you actually in your interview, Joe, but I spared you at that point. But over to you.
Well, we spoke about it in the breakout room, I guess, or at least my reasons for being a bit reluctant. Yeah, because I think for some activists where the court cases have gone on, and they might have been found guilty, then appealed, and you know, it's kept going. It might be something like the Stansted 15 or Smashy Doe or whatever, and the consequences for those activists are really massive. But for us, obstructing a highway is not, it doesn't carry like harsh consequences really. Or, you know, there's not a threat of prison, unless obviously we'd be breaking bail conditions from another action or whatever. But on its own, it's not, the consequences aren't very scary. So I do feel like it became all about the legal side of things, and that I didn't, you know, there wasn't much that I wasn't feeling scared or nervous about it. So it wasn't about me anymore.
Okay, before we call on John to ask his question, I'm just going to check whether there's any of the other 4 and any of the other 3 of the 4 who want to say anything about any reluctance they might feel.
I think Joe summed it up. Really, what I feel as well.
Okay, in that case, we're going to go to John. Go ahead, John.
Thanks to everyone for what they've shared. It seems at the moment the law courts are almost one of the few ways the legality of the current government is being tested. Think, for example, of shenanigans this week, which thankfully saved some people from departing on a plane, albeit with horrific trauma that they have suffered getting to that point. So as people who have had their politics and views tested by the law courts, I'd be interested to hear, what place do you now think the law has in testing and interrogating actions of government or other spaces?
Nora, over to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking that I think it was like, now recently it was a collaboration, or it was a coming together of different things, right, of the law courts and of direct action. And I think that's exactly what we mean when we talk about that tension as well. Like, for me, it's a productive tension, it's a creative tension, but also a very difficult one to navigate, and one that requires mutual trust, for example, between the lawyers and the activists, which is not always, you know, easy to forge, or it can sort of be quite, and not just the lawyers and the activists, like everyone else who's involved in the process. Raj is great, by the way. So I think that tension always runs through activism, and it's not only between the legal side. It's just that the aspect of engaging with winning material gains that will help us, like, you know, actual wins, like for example stopping a flight or getting this verdict, and then the bigger sort of what are the ultimate aims that we're standing for. You know, we're not the movement. I think it was Raj who said it's not just about winning free speech. That would be pointless in itself. It's about what do we do with that. And I think those two elements, the sort of the ideal of justice, equality, and the actual wins that we can achieve, which are always limited, those are intention. And I think it's impossible for any individual, even just like one group or one demographic, to navigate that tension. It always requires working together between different groups, between people with different perspectives, different levels of power, different jobs, different sort of approaches to activism. So yeah, and I think the recent thing that happened is just such a great example of that, and I think we need just more of that, different parts of the movement working together in ways that can achieve that kind of stuff.
Raj?
I just strongly agree with that. The example I always use is actually from the States, and say that, you know, Brown v. Board of Education made segregation illegal in 1955. Nothing happened until there was direct action through the civil rights movement. And direct action through the civil rights movement was built on Brown v. Board of Education. So, you know, each section creates its own part, but the aim of it is not academic. The aim of it is to create change. And I think that that's the absolute key, be it protesters who were lying in the middle of, you know, outside detention centers on Wednesday night, to the lawyers that were going to the Supreme Court or the European Court of Human Rights. So it's just trying to meld all of that. And sometimes it's not a plan. Sometimes it happens sort of iteratively. You just have to try and make sure that everyone does their bit.
Any other questions or comments anyone wants to make?
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I've sort of got a question. I'm struggling to form it, but I was sort of inspired by a conversation I heard this week. So, oh, by the way, I've done well out of Ziegler because I've won twice with it. So the question might be, how much does the right to free speech and protest matter if kind of at the extreme end, so if governments are engaged with genocide, maybe. So yeah, like it's that versus like the right to necessity and revolution, essentially. So presumably free speech only matters in that case up to a point. So presumably the thing that's going to shift things when there's like something really serious going on, presumably the thing that's going to shift things is going well beyond what people would see as free speech. I haven't really got a question. I think it's more of just a thought, and what do people think, if that made any sense.
Lots of heads nodding. Will any mouths open? That's the question. Anyone wants to say anything?
Just
Nora's
a quick
gonna...
thing.
Oh, okay. Henrietta's coming.
Well, just
Yeah.
quickly, it was freedom of expression. So expression could be stopping something from happening. That's all I was going to say.
Okay.
That does go beyond free speech.
And Nora wanted to say something.
Yeah, now I've got conflicting thoughts going on. I was going to say, yeah, that for me, the right to protest or freedom of expression is a means, you know, that a friend of mine gave a really nice definition of direct action the other day that I liked, which was direct action is when you do something and unless the government violently stops you or the police violently stops you from doing it, then you win. And so for me, the right to protest or those kind of freedoms are something that prevents them from removing us, that can allow us. So no, it's not the goal in itself, if that makes sense. Like it is, but I'm not sure if that's what you mean. You mean like I think like, yeah, in a revolutionary situation, the right to protest will mean fuck all, obviously. But in the meantime, you know, it's also about building movements and getting the wins that allow us to keep fighting. And a lot of it is about survival as well, right? In the meantime, for example, stopping people from being deported, that's like, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, Nick, sorry. I had another thought, but I've forgotten it now, so maybe someone else wants to respond.
Henrietta.
Could I just add something? Because it's sort of, I think it connects back with Susan was talking about how, you know, when she was involved in direct action in the States, and there was a sort of a process that ended up in being arrested and having prison time. And I know that was like a sort of, there was a Catholic worker element of that. And I think there's an element of Catholic worker sort of thinking as a sort of non-participation. And I was aware that some people, when we first went to the first plea hearing, they wouldn't want to participate in the court process. So they just said, well, if you mean I was guilty of stopping a truck, yeah, then I was guilty, and walked off. They wouldn't want to take part in the court, or they wouldn't recognize the court. That was another view. And so how it's sort of that process that Susan was talking about, I feel that those kind of direct actions have changed a lot now, particularly with Extinction Rebellion. And there's the sort of tensions between the state stopping you from doing something has changed a lot. And it's not necessary for the state to come down on you really hard, I hope. But whereas in those stories from the 70s, or, well, that's not, you know, the Catholic left in the States, it really was important that they were incarcerated, or even now, you know, it's part of the action that they were incarcerated for many years. But as Nora says, there's something different going on, the collaboration between different groups, and sort of much more fluid.
Okay, so I was about to say we've got time for one more question, and Susan Clarkson has got that last question. So over to you, Susan.
Well, it's not really a question, it's just agreeing with what Henrietta has said, because I realise that not only is it a different time now from my experience, you know, I'm talking about nearly 20 years ago in the States, but it's a different culture. Our culture is very different. And she's right, Henrietta's right. I did come from the, you know, the Catholic left, and that was what really influenced me. And so, yeah, it is a different time. And I've done direct action recently, and I haven't felt it was the right thing for me to do. So I really would think seriously now about doing it. Because I'm stuck in the past, basically.
Anywhere where you are, Susan, I'm happy to be stuck there for sure. Okay, how we're going to round things off, if this is okay with the speakers, is we're going to go in reverse order. If you just have a last thing that you want to say in closing, which means we're going to go to you, Raj, with no warning at all.
Yeah, well,
if you have any last words you'd like to say.
So just picking up on the last couple of points, I think firstly, it is free expression. So being in the middle of the road to prevent trucks going into DSEI is the right to protest, is the right to free expression. Pulling a statute down that celebrates a slave trader is free expression. And so it has a very wide ambit. And secondly, controversially for a lawyer, but free expression and free speech is revolutionary, always has been. It's how revolutions start. The key is that it's non-violent, but that's the absolute key to change society, because you have to convince others. So that is what makes it so powerful. Can make it very very difficult as well in the wrong hands. But that's what makes it such a powerful force in society.
Thank you very much, Raj. And that means we come to Nora next, if you're willing to say a few last words.
I don't know so much. I guess I'll just say, to clarify what I'm responding to Raj, is what I meant is that in a situation where there's no rule of law or whatever, then the right to free expression doesn't mean anything. But that I wasn't really sure what Nick was referring to in terms of like a situation of societal breakdown, for example. Yeah, so many. It's been a really good discussion. Thank you everyone there's definitely a lot more to think about and a lot more to say, but this has been really good, and it's nice to see a few familiar faces from way back when.
Thank you, Nora. And that means we come to Henrietta, if you're willing to say a few last words.
I just want to say thank you for having us. And preparing for this made me think a lot about peace activism, stroke peacemaking, which it's inspired me for sort of more ideas, more thoughts. Yeah, thank you very much.
And that means we come to Joe, if you're willing to say something, Joe. You're muted at the moment. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just thanks again to everyone. It's really nice to hear from all the three others that did the action with and from Raj about your reflections on it, because we haven't really done that very much. So yeah, that's been really good, and thank you to everyone for asking questions. And yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much everyone for coming. So there is a version of the story in print of the story of the action with interviews with our 5 speakers, and there's going to be a longer version of that with more from the transcripts from those interviews that may get published later today or tomorrow. Please join with me in unmuting and applauding our 5 speakers for all that they've shared today and all that they've done to help create the Ziegler decision, which has benefited at least one of us with 2 acquittals. So, we've got 6 acquittals out of the decision. So anyway, thank you very much to all of the speakers.